In the quiet moments before dawn breaks, when shadows still dance across ancient lands, there are stories that whisper through time itself. Stories of power struggles, divine intervention, and the mysterious ways that destiny unfolds. Today, we journey back over 3,000 years to a moment when fear gripped the heart of a king, and a prophet discovered that some things are beyond human control, no matter how much gold is offered. Picture this: a vast desert landscape stretching endlessly under a burning sun, where kingdoms rise and fall like sand dunes in the wind. In this harsh but beautiful world, news travels fast, especially when it carries the weight of terror. And terror was exactly what King Balak of Moab felt when he heard the reports coming from the east. Far away in the land of Moab, King Balak stood high atop his palace walls. The morning breeze carried dust and the scent of distant campfires, but what truly filled the air was an overwhelming sense of dread. His eyes, usually sharp and confident, now held a deep worry as he gazed down at the valley below. What he saw would have made any ruler's blood run cold. Stretching across the entire valley was an endless sea of tents. Not just any tents, but Israelite tents. Thousands upon thousands of them, like stars scattered across the desert floor. These were the people who had done the impossible, who had crushed mighty nations and toppled kings who had seemed untouchable just months before. Balak's advisors had brought him the reports, each one more terrifying than the last. The Israelites had marched out of Egypt like a great wave, unstoppable and fierce. They had faced armies that had never known defeat, and yet these desert wanderers had emerged victorious every single time. Now they were camped right at Moab's border, and if they decided to march forward, Balak knew in his heart that nothing would stop them. His warriors were strong. They were brave men who had fought many battles and won many victories. But these were not ordinary enemies they would face. These were people whose God had split the sea itself and shattered the mighty empire of Egypt. Against such power, what could any sword accomplish? What could any army do when facing a nation whose very God fought alongside them? Balak's mind raced with desperate thoughts. There had to be a way, some strategy that could save his kingdom. Then, like lightning in a dark sky, an idea struck him. If military might could not stop them, perhaps there was another way. Perhaps he could turn their own God against them. The king's advisors gathered around him as he outlined his plan. There were whispers of a man, a prophet whose reputation stretched across nations. His name was Balaam, and he was feared and respected in equal measure throughout the ancient world. People said that whoever Balaam blessed was lifted high like an eagle soaring toward the heavens. But whoever he cursed was brought down to ruin, their hopes scattered like dust in the wind. This was Balak's only hope. If he could convince Balaam to come to Moab and speak a curse over the Israelites, perhaps their God would turn away from them. Perhaps their strength would crumble, and Moab would be saved. Without wasting another moment, Balak sent his fastest messengers riding hard through the desert. They carried riches that would make most men's eyes widen in amazement. Silver that gleamed like moonlight, gold that caught the sun's rays like captured fire, and royal gifts that spoke of the king's desperation. Their mission was clear: find Balaam and bring him back, no matter what it took. The messengers rode through scorching days and cool nights, their horses' hooves beating out a rhythm of urgency against the desert floor. They knew that the fate of their kingdom might very well rest on the success of their journey. Night had fallen when Balaam stepped outside his dwelling. The torch light flickered against his weathered face, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. Before him stood the messengers of Moab, their arms full of glittering gold and shining silver. The firelight made the precious metals seem almost alive, pulsing with promise and possibility. Their voices were smooth as silk, carefully chosen words that had been rehearsed during their long journey. "Great prophet," they said, "King Balak offers you riches beyond imagination. Come with us and curse Israel for him, and he will reward you beyond your wildest dreams." But Balaam's response surprised them. Here was a man known throughout the land for his power, yet his words were humble and measured. "I can only speak what the Lord commands," he told them simply. "Stay here tonight, and in the morning I will tell you what God wants me to do." That night, as Balaam lay in his home, something extraordinary happened. The very presence of God filled the air around him, thick and unmistakable like the calm before a great storm. Then came the voice of the Lord, clear and commanding, "Do not go with them. You shall not curse these people, for they are blessed." The answer was crystal clear. There was no room for doubt, no space for negotiation. When morning came, Balaam stood before the waiting messengers and delivered his response, "Go back to your king. The Lord has refused to let me go with you." The messengers returned to King Balak with Balaam's refusal, but Balak was not a man who accepted defeat easily. His kingdom was still in danger, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect it. This time, he would not take no for an answer. He sent a new delegation, but this one was different. These were not ordinary messengers but officials of the highest rank, men whose very presence commanded respect. They carried gifts that made the first offering look modest by comparison. This was no mere request anymore. This was a royal summons from a king who was used to getting his way. When the new messengers arrived at Balaam's dwelling, their approach was different too. They spoke with authority and urgency. "Let nothing keep you from coming to the king. He will reward you greatly beyond anything you can imagine. Name your price, and it shall be yours. There is no limit to what King Balak will give you." The offer was tempting, incredibly tempting. Most men would have accepted immediately. But Balaam's answer remained firm. "Even if Balak gave me his entire palace filled with gold and silver, I cannot go beyond what the Lord my God commands me to do." Yet that night, something interesting happened. Perhaps driven by curiosity, or maybe by the sheer magnitude of the king's offer, Balaam asked God again. He went before the Lord in prayer, laying out the situation once more. And this time, surprisingly, the answer was different. "Go with them," God said, "but you must speak only the words I give you." Before dawn broke the next morning, Balaam saddled his faithful donkey and set out for Moab. He had no idea that the road ahead would test far more than just his obedience to God's word. As he traveled, he was completely unaware that something extraordinary was about to happen. The morning sun blazed over the dry earth, and the road ahead seemed clear and straightforward. Balaam rode confidently, perhaps thinking about what lay ahead, maybe wondering what exactly God would have him say when he reached King Balak. Then suddenly, without any warning, his donkey stopped dead in its tracks. Balaam frowned and pulled the reins firmly. "Move," he commanded, but the animal refused to budge. It stood there as if frozen, its eyes wide with what looked almost like terror. What Balaam couldn't see was what his donkey could see clearly. Standing directly in their path was a warrior unlike any earthly soldier. This was an angel of the Lord, towering and magnificent, with a drawn sword that gleamed with heavenly fire. The very air around this divine being seemed to shimmer with power and authority. Growing frustrated with his stubborn animal, Balaam struck the donkey once, then twice, and then again. "Move, you stubborn beast," he shouted, his voice echoing across the empty road. He raised his hand to strike yet again when something absolutely impossible happened. The donkey spoke, not in some mystical, otherworldly voice, but in clear, understandable words. "What have I done to you that you have struck me 3 times?" Most people would have fallen off their mount in shock or run screaming into the desert. But somehow, Balaam found himself responding as if talking donkeys were the most natural thing in the world. His anger overcame his amazement. "Because you have made a fool of me." Balaam snapped back at his donkey. "If I had a sword, I would kill you right here." The donkey's voice remained calm and reasonable. "Have I ever done this to you before? In all the years you have ridden me, have I ever refused to obey you like this?" Balaam hesitated, his anger cooling as he considered the question. "No," he admitted quietly. "Never." Then, in an instant, everything changed. Balaam's eyes were opened, and he could see what had been invisible to him before. There, standing directly in their path, was the angel of the Lord. The heavenly warrior's sword was drawn and ready, radiating a fearsome presence that made the very earth seem to tremble beneath them. Balaam threw himself to his knees, his heart pounding with terror. All his pride, all his confidence, all his reputation as a great prophet meant nothing in the face of this divine being. The angel's voice was like thunder rolling across the mountains. "Why have you beaten your donkey 3 times? I stood in your way because your path was reckless before me. If your donkey had not turned aside, I would have struck you down and spared her life." The words hit Balaam like physical blows. His faithful donkey, the animal he had beaten in frustration, had actually saved his life. She had seen the danger that he, for all his spiritual reputation, had been blind to. "I have sinned," Balaam whispered, his voice barely audible. "If my journey displeases you, I will turn back immediately." But the angel's response surprised him. "Go with the men, but you will speak only the words I give you to speak." Balaam rose slowly, his legs shaking and his pride completely shattered. The road to Moab still stretched ahead, but now he understood something profound. This journey was not about his reputation, his payment, or even King Balak's desperate request. This was about something far greater than any human plan or desire. When Balaam finally arrived in Moab, he was met with a sight that would have impressed most visitors. Before him stood the city gates, massive and imposing, flanked by towering banners that bore the royal seal of King Balak. Everything spoke of power, wealth, and military might. Then came the royal procession. A line of decorated chariots rolled forward, surrounded by elite warriors whose armor gleamed in the sunlight. At the center of it all was King Balak himself, dressed in royal robes that proclaimed his authority over the land. The king stepped forward with barely contained excitement. "At last, you have come," he exclaimed. "Did you not believe my messengers when they told you of the riches I would give you? I can make you wealthier than any man alive." But Balaam's response was not what the king expected. The prophet's eyes seemed distant, his thoughts still heavy with the weight of his encounter with the angel. "I have come as you requested, O king," he said quietly. "But you must understand this clearly. I can only say what the Lord commands me to say." The king's smile faltered slightly, but his determination remained strong. "Then let us waste no time," he replied. "Come, the people you must curse are waiting just beyond those hills." As night fell, King Balak led Balaam to a high place called Balaam'S, a sacred hill that offered a perfect view of the vast Israelite camp below. The scene was both beautiful and terrifying. Thousands of campfires burned like earthbound stars, stretching as far as the eye could see. The scent of sacrificial offerings filled the air, thick and heavy with religious significance. "Look down there," the king said, pointing dramatically toward the sprawling camp. "There they are, a people too numerous to count, swarming like locusts over the land. Curse them for me now, and save my kingdom." 7 altars were built according to ancient custom, and 7 bulls and 7 rams were offered as sacrifices. The smoke rose into the night sky like prayers seeking heaven's attention. Everything was prepared perfectly for the curse that would destroy Israel's power. Balaam stepped forward to the edge of the high place. King Balak held his breath, his advisors leaned forward in anticipation, and the very air seemed to wait for the words that would seal Israel's fate. But instead of lifting his voice in a curse, Balaam turned his face toward heaven. The Lord spoke to him in that moment, filling him with words that were completely opposite to what everyone expected. When Balaam opened his mouth, instead of a curse, a powerful blessing poured forth. "From the hills I behold them, a people set apart, mighty and blessed beyond measure. Who can count the dust of Jacob? Who can number even a fourth of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like theirs." The words echoed across the hilltop like thunder. King Balak's face went from hopeful anticipation to complete shock, then to burning anger. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightened, and he turned sharply toward the prophet. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising with each word. "I brought you here to curse my enemies, not to bless them. This is exactly the opposite of what I asked for." But Balaam's voice remained steady and calm. "Must I not speak carefully what the Lord puts in my mouth? I told you from the beginning that I can only say what God commands me to say." The king's face darkened with frustration, but he was not ready to give up. Perhaps the location was wrong. Perhaps a different place would yield different results. "Come," he said through gritted teeth. "We will try again from another place. Perhaps there your God will permit you to curse them for me." So King Balak led Balaam to another high place called Pisgah, where ancient altars had stood for generations against the starlit sky. The priests hurriedly prepared 7 more sacrifices, the flames leaping higher as if trying to reach heaven itself. The smell of burning offerings filled the night air once again. With his voice tight with expectation and barely controlled desperation, the king said, "Perhaps here the Lord will let you curse them. Surely from this place, with these perfect sacrifices, your God will grant my request." Balaam stood before the fresh offerings, closed his eyes, and waited upon the Lord. The moments stretched out like hours as everyone held their breath. Then, once again, when Balaam opened his mouth to speak, another blessing came forth instead of the desired curse. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind, Balaam declared with growing confidence. Has he said something and will not do it? Has he spoken and will not make it good? Behold, I have received a command to bless, and he has blessed. I cannot reverse it or change it. King Balak's face twisted with fury. His hands balled into tight fists as rage consumed him. This was not going according to plan at all. His voice rose to almost a shout. Enough of this nonsense. If you will not curse them for me, then at least do not bless them. Just say nothing at all. But Balaam could only shake his head. The word of the Lord was not something that could be negotiated or compromised. Balak's patience was completely gone now, but his desperation drove him to try one more time. He seized Balaam's arm, his grip tight with frustration, and dragged him to yet another place called Peor, which overlooked the wilderness. This was his absolute last hope, his final chance to save his kingdom. Surely here you can curse them, Balak insisted, his voice now a mixture of desperation and command. This is a sacred place, and from here you must be able to see clearly what needs to be done. Once again, the familiar ritual began. 7 altars were prepared with great care, 7 bulls and 7 rams were offered as sacrifices. But this time, something was different about Balaam's approach. Instead of seeking omens or looking for signs as he had done before, he simply fixed his eyes upon the wilderness where Israel camped. As he gazed upon the great nations spread out below, something powerful happened. The Spirit of God came upon him with an intensity he had never experienced before. It was as if he could see not just with his physical eyes, but with divine sight that revealed the true nature of what lay before him. When Balaam spoke this time, his words carried a power that seemed to make the very air vibrate with authority. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob! How beautiful are your dwellings, O Israel! Like valleys they stretch out, like gardens beside a river, like aloe trees planted by the Lord, like cedar trees beside the waters. The Lord himself is with them, and their king shall be exalted. King Balak staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no words would come. For a moment, he stood there in complete silence, trying to process what had just happened. Then his rage could no longer be contained. All the frustration, all the fear, all the desperation of the past days exploded out of him at once. He turned on Balaam, his voice now a deep growl of betrayal and fury. Enough! I called you here to curse my enemies, and not once, not twice, but 3 times you have blessed them instead. Leave my sight immediately. I would have made you rich beyond your wildest dreams, but your Lord has kept you from receiving my rewards. The king's anger was terrible to behold. Here was a man who was used to having his commands obeyed without question, who had never been defied so completely. Yet Balaam did not flinch or step backward. Instead, he stood his ground with quiet dignity. Did I not tell your very first messengers exactly what would happen? Balaam replied calmly. I told them clearly that I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God, whether for good or for evil. I cannot speak anything on my own authority, but only what the Lord tells me to speak. Then something remarkable happened. Balaam turned his face toward the horizon, and with the power of God's Spirit still resting upon him, he began to speak words that would echo through history for thousands of years to come. This was no longer just about the immediate conflict between Moab and Israel. This was a prophecy that would reach far beyond even Balaam's own lifetime. His voice took on an otherworldly quality as he declared, I see him, but not here and now. I perceive him, but far in the distant future. A star will rise from Jacob, a scepter will emerge from Israel. It shall crush the corners of Moab and destroy all the sons of tumult. These words spoke of something far greater than the current crisis. They pointed toward a future king, a coming ruler who would arise from the very people that Balak so desperately wanted cursed. Instead of bringing destruction upon Israel, Balaam's words painted a picture of their ultimate triumph and the rise of a leader whose influence would span generations. King Balak listened to these final words with a mixture of horror and helpless rage. Not only had his plan completely failed, but now he had to hear prophecies about Israel's future glory and his own nation's eventual defeat. The very prophet he had hired to solve his problems had instead made them seem even more hopeless. What makes this ancient story so fascinating is not just the dramatic events themselves, but what they reveal about the nature of divine will versus human ambition. Here was one of the most powerful kings of his time, a man who commanded armies and ruled over vast territories. He had wealth that could buy almost anything, influence that could move mountains, and desperation that drove him to extreme measures. Yet when faced with the will of God, all of his power, all of his riches, and all of his clever plans amounted to nothing. He learned the hard way that there are some things in this universe that cannot be bought, cannot be forced, and cannot be changed through human effort alone. Balaam himself represents something equally intriguing. He was a prophet who clearly had real spiritual power and connection to the divine, yet he was also attracted to worldly wealth and honors. His story shows us the tension between spiritual calling and material temptation, between doing what is right and doing what is profitable. The speaking donkey adds an element that might seem almost comical to modern readers, but it serves a profound purpose in the narrative. Sometimes the humblest creatures can see spiritual realities that escape even the most educated and sophisticated people. The donkey's ability to see the angel when Balaam could not reminds us that spiritual insight is not always connected to human wisdom or reputation. This ancient tale offers lessons that remain relevant thousands of years later. It reminds us that true power does not always come from the places we expect. King Balak had armies, wealth, and political authority, but none of these could accomplish what he needed most. Sometimes the mightiest forces in human society are powerless against higher purposes and divine plans. The story also shows us something important about integrity and faithfulness. Balaam could have easily spoken the words that King Balak wanted to hear. He could have collected his payment and walked away rich and satisfied. Instead, he chose to remain faithful to what he knew was right, even when it cost him greatly. For King Balak, the lesson was harsh but necessary. He learned that some problems cannot be solved through manipulation, bribery, or clever schemes. Sometimes we must accept that there are forces greater than our own will and plans that extend beyond our understanding. The events described in this story had consequences that rippled through history for centuries. The Israelites did indeed continue their journey and eventually establish themselves as a powerful nation in the Promised Land. The prophecy about the coming star and scepter from Jacob has been interpreted by many as pointing toward King David and ultimately toward an even greater future king. King Balak's fears proved to be well-founded, but his attempts to change the outcome through cursing only served to confirm and strengthen what was already destined to happen. His story became a cautionary tale about the futility of fighting against divine will and the danger of trying to manipulate spiritual forces for political gain. Balaam's reputation, meanwhile, became complex and controversial. While he spoke true prophecies and blessed Israel as God commanded, later traditions suggest that he eventually found other ways to harm the Israelites through different means. His story reminds us that even those who have spiritual gifts and speak divine words can still struggle with personal character and moral choices. In our modern world, this ancient tale still speaks to situations we face every day. We live in times when powerful people often believe they can buy their way out of any problem, manipulate any situation to their advantage, or find clever workarounds for moral and spiritual principles. The story of Balaam and Balak reminds us that there are still some things that cannot be purchased, some realities that cannot be manipulated, and some truths that cannot be changed no matter how much pressure is applied. It challenges us to think about our own relationship with power, wealth, and the temptation to compromise our principles for personal gain. The tale also encourages us to pay attention to unexpected sources of wisdom. Just as Balaam's donkey could see spiritual realities that escaped the prophet himself, sometimes the most important insights come from the most unlikely places. We should remain humble enough to listen when truth comes to us in forms we did not expect. As we reflect on this remarkable story from the distant past, we are reminded that some themes are truly timeless. The struggle between right and wrong, the tension between spiritual calling and material desire, the question of whether might makes right, these are issues that every generation must face in its own way. The story of Balaam teaches us that integrity cannot be bought at any price, that divine purposes cannot be thwarted by human schemes, and that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected sources. It challenges us to examine our own lives and ask ourselves, when faced with pressure to compromise our principles for personal gain, what choice will we make? In a world that often seems dominated by those who have the most money, the most influence, or the most clever strategies, this ancient tale reminds us that there are still higher powers at work, still principles that matter more than profit, and still truths that cannot be silenced no matter how much gold is offered to buy their silence. The next time you face pressure to say what others want to hear instead of what you know is right, remember the prophet who stood before kings and spoke only truth. Remember the donkey who saw angels when humans were blind. Remember that some things in this universe are more valuable than all the treasures that earthly kingdoms can offer. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of history's most fascinating and mysterious stories. If this tale of ancient kings, talking animals, and divine intervention has captured your imagination, I would be incredibly grateful if you could hit that like button and show your support. Your engagement really helps this channel reach more people who might enjoy these deep dives into historical narratives and timeless wisdom. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for more content that explores the rich tapestry of human history and the stories that have shaped our world. I would love to hear your thoughts about this remarkable tale. What aspect of Balaam's story resonated most with you? Do you think he was truly a righteous prophet, or was he simply caught between competing loyalties? Have you ever experienced moments when the right choice was also the most difficult choice? Please share your insights and reflections in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the amazing stories that connect us all across the centuries. See you in the next video.